Morning. I'd like to call the September 13th Kankakee County Board meeting to order. Today's invocation is from John Featherly.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, fellow county board members, and others gathered here this morning. Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us safely bringing us together today. We ask that you give us the knowledge and strength to continue to serve the people of Kankakee County. We rely upon your guidance to help us provide a peaceful, safe, and meaningful life for our residents. We ask that you watch over our police officers, firefighters, and paramedics as they carry out their very difficult jobs protecting our county. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen.
Thank you. Please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All righty. Get a roll call, please.
Mr. Hess. Present. Mr. Tholen. Mrs. Polk. Mr. Snipes.
Present.
Mr. Seroy.
Present.
Mr. Lear.
Present.
Mrs. Weber.
Present.
Mrs. Peters.
Present.
Mrs. Parker.
Present.
Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Kirko.
Present.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Present.
Mr. Swanson. Mr. Featherling.
Present.
Mr. Dunhill.
Present.
Mr. Miller.
Present.
Mr. Long.
Present.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Present.
Mr. Hunter.
Present.
Ms. Bryan. Mr. Collins. Ms. Hudson.
Present.
Mr. Smith.
Present.
Mr. Alexander Hildebrand.
Present.
Mr. Gowler. Mr. Raymond.
Present.
Ms. Foster.
Present.
Mr. Wheeler.
Present.
You have a quorum.
We have a quorum. Let's see here. I have one public comment, actually. It's from the Regional Superintendent of Schools, Frank Petkunas. He's going to be back at the microphone here.
Morning.
Morning,
Chairman. Is the microphone on?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to come and reintroduce myself as the newly appointed Regional Superintendent of Schools. I wanted to thank you all for your support, thank Chairman Wheeler and you all for your foresight in the appointment process. Dr. Murphy retired July 31st. Mr. Hendrickson graciously agreed to come to our office on August 1st and do the swearing in ceremony for us and the oath of office to put me in place August 1st in the morning, so that there was no gap in regional superintendent, so that we had a smooth transition for that office, which was very nice. I don't know that there would have been any issues if there wasn't, but it was just nice that we were able to work together to make that transition very smooth. We're off to a great start. The year has been really nice this year after the last couple of years, so great attitudes. Everybody's really excited and energized. You know, obviously there's still some things going on and working through some challenges from the last couple of years, but just a totally different start to the school year this year. So very excited about that. As I said, our office, there was no issues with the transition. Greg did a great job getting us prepared in moving forward. One of the other things that I wanted to do is introduce our new assistant regional superintendent, which was one of the first things that I did as regional superintendent, is appoint the assistant regional superintendent. So luckily we had a person on staff with us for the last 5 years working as our PD administrator, and that's Patty High, and she's here today. So I wanted to introduce Patty High. I'm very excited and pleased to have Patty agree to be the assistant regional superintendent. She's going to do a great job. You'll get to see her around a lot and see a lot of the great things that she'll be able to do. She's done a lot of great things for us the last 5 years, and she has stepped into that role and again has not missed a beat. So she's kind of doing double duty right now, but we're going to work through and figure out how to transition her old role as well. But right now she's kind of balancing that as well. So a lot going on with us, but again, I wanted to thank you all and assure you that we are business as usual and moving forward and looking forward to a great year. So thank you all, and let us know if there's anything we can do at all, and we'll send you updates as things go on. We have a joint ed meeting Thursday this week, so we'll be giving our annual report at that point, so you'll look forward to that. So thank you again.
Thanks. And welcome aboard. Thank you all. Moving on now, we're going to have a rather lengthy presentation and I would imagine some questions. But in order to move forward, I don't want to keep some people sitting around here if they have other things to do today. So I was wanting to see if I can get a motion to do the proclamations and then also to move up Wes's agenda item, because he's going to be sitting here a while and the press is hawking their seat over there. So so I want to see if we can bring up number, hold on a second here. I've got to find it again. Number 163 up to the front so we can get those taken care of. And I want to say out of the way, but discussed. Mr. Eckhoff, Mr. Featherling with a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. All righty. Well, first off, we'll do the resolutions because I believe both gentlemen are here today. So,
Proclamations.
Proclamation, excuse me.
That's okay.
Proclamations. I'll mix them together. So yeah, if you could read them both, since then we can do them both here. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Proclamation of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois, honoring Danny Allen Demers for his many years of public service to the people of Kankakee County. Whereas Danny Allen Demers commenced his service to the people of Bourbonnais and Kankakee County in July of 1977 when he began his career as a firefighter. And whereas Danny Allen Demers has served the village of Bourbonnais and Bourbonnais Township for over 45 years, including service as firefighter, fire lieutenant, and fire captain. And whereas Danny Allen Demers was a recipient of the Bourbonnais Township Fire Protection District Officer of the Year Award in 1996 and 1997. And whereas Danny Allen Demers was the recipient of the Bourbonnais Township Fire Protection District Ben Franklin Award in 1998 and 2010. And whereas Danny Allen Demers was the recipient of the Bourbonnais Township Fire Protection District EMT of the Year Award in 1999. And whereas Danny Allen Demers further served the people of Bourbonnais and Kankakee County by his years of volunteer service to the Bourbonnais Firefighters Association, the Maternity BVM Knights of Columbus, and the Bradley Bourbonnais Youth Softball League. And whereas Danny Allen Demers has made service to the people of Bourbonnais, Kankakee County, and state of Illinois his life's work. Now therefore be it proclaimed that the Kankakee County Board greatly appreciates service to his community and many contributions to the safety and welfare of the people of Kankakee County. And September 13th, 2022 is hereby proclaimed as Danny Allen Demers Day for the County of Kankakee.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your service, and what we'll do is we'll bring you both up at the same time, and then give you a chance to say something to the crowd for all posterity. Be safe forever on the interwebs. So,
Proclamation of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois, honoring Ralph Garfield Hyde for his many years of public service to the people of Kankakee County. Whereas Ralph Garfield Hyde commenced his service to the people of Bourbonnais and Kankakee County in June of 1978 when he began his career as a firefighter. And whereas Ralph Garfield Hyde served the village of Bourbonnais and Bourbonnais Township for 44 years, including service as a firefighter, firefighter paramedic, and engineer paramedic. And whereas Ralph Garfield Hyde was the recipient of the Bourbonnais Township Fire Protection District Engineer of the Year Award in 1991. Whereas Ralph Garfield Hyde was the recipient of the Bourbonnais Township Fire Protection District EMT of the Year Award in 1998 and 1999. Whereas Ralph Garfield Hyde was the recipient of the Bourbonnais Township Fire Protection District Ben Franklin Award in 2001. And whereas Ralph Garfield Hyde further served the people of Bourbonnais and Kankakee County by his years of service as an instructor in the Kankakee County Community Emergency Response Teams, the Mabas Division 7 Fire Academy, the Kankakee Valley Fire Expo Firefighter 3, the American Heart Association CPR, as a student advisor at the Kankakee Area Career Center, as the Bourbonnais Fire Protection District representative on the Bourbonnais Friendship Festival Committee. And whereas Ralph Garfield Hyde has made service to the people of Bourbonnais, Kankakee County, and the state of Illinois his life's work, now therefore be it proclaimed that the Kankakee County Board greatly appreciates service to his community and many contributions to the safety and welfare of the people of Kankakee County. And September 14th, 2022 is hereby proclaimed as Ralph Garfield Hyde Day for the County of Kankakee.
Well, I tell you, thanks to both of you. If you would join me up here. Chief Keener, did you want to maybe come up and help present this? Or do you want to sit in the back and let this be their day? Okay, gentlemen? Yes, thank you so much. Please meet us up here in the front.
I was going to, but I was waiting for Andy to get that.
There you go. Already. You know how long this is gonna be?
I have no idea. Yeah.
Congratulations, thank you. Let me turn it on, hold on. There you go.
I'd like to thank the board. It's been an honor and privilege to serve the people of Kankakee County, the village of Bourbonnais, Bourbonnais Township, and everybody. My greatest success is my wife, my 2 boys, and becoming an instructor in Kankakee to teach our fellow firefighters to get them prepared for the future. Hopefully I've made an impact in that area, and I've passed the torch forward. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you. You know, I just realized we have Mr. Deeney here from the Highway Department for 45 years of service, and maybe we do that one right now as well. Is that okay? Yeah, motion, second. All those in favor say aye. Okay. So we do want to thank you for your service. If you would like to come up, Greg, did you want to present that? Yeah. It's in the corner right there. Jim, will you hand the certificate?
You don't even look 45 years old.
I just wanted to say a few words as well. 45 years deserves some kind of a speech. I'm not good at it, but I'm gonna do my best here. Rick started out as a highway maintainer back when they had that classification. Then everyone became equipment operators. He moved up to that. Did that for a while, ran a paint truck. Then he became our #1 grade all guy. He was the ace behind the machine. After so many years of that, he moved up. He's now the maintenance foreman. He's been here for 20, how many years?
23 years.
23 years as highway foreman, running the operations, keeping track of all the people, making sure the roads get plowed, the streets get patched, road stripes get painted, stuff like that. And this is our third 45-year guy this year. No one's ever going to see that again. But I mean, that just shows the dedication that these guys have, and I just wanted to thank Rick for being part of it and being here. And he's outlasted 3 other county engineers, but he's not going to do me. But thank you very much.
As far as you know. Yeah. Congratulations.
I haven't even been alive that long.
Yeah. I might have shoes that old. By the way, it's Dumas. No, I'm just kidding. Moving on, sorry. Today is we have a presentation. Now, Patrick Curran is here from Respark, and so is Eddie Barreo from Rincon. We went through the process on the needs assessment, and we have the presentation, the results, if you will, some of the statistical information. Much broader data sets are in your packet. So with that, we'll bring up Patrick to the front. Eddie, if you have 2 cents, there's the back microphone back there. Huh? I'm sorry? Oh, I apologize. Can you hold on just 1 second? No, you can stay there. Forgot about Wes. Sorry, Wes, you're lurking in the hallway. So we need a motion on this one. This is, and Wes can go to the microphone back there and explain it. That, you remember the chiller project in Building and Grounds? We had a problem with the air going out over there, and while it's cool right now, we're expected to get warm again. So Wes, if you want to explain that, it's on.
Yeah, as we talked about You got me?
Yeah.
As we talked about at the committee meeting last month, we had sort of an emergency situation at the annex building. The chiller barrel cracked, and the age of that chiller was estimated to be between 33 and 35 years old, the chiller over there. So as it was explained to me, the chiller barrel acts as a heat exchanger, similar to in your furnace. It's gonna, the heat exchanger is obviously gonna heat your home. The chiller barrel is gonna cool the building. The chiller barrel had many cracks in it, and the coolant was leaking into the chiller fluid that obviously chills the building. So after talking to a couple vendors, it was anticipated that the repair would be almost 60 to 70% of the replacement. So after talking with Chairman Wheeler, we went ahead and moved forward. I think Chairman consulted the State's Attorney's Office. Is that correct?
Correct.
So we went ahead, and even though it was an emergency, I didn't need to, but I went the extra step, and I thought it was important, given the size of the project, to go ahead and get 2 bids. So I went ahead and did that. The bids came in at, then this is for replacement of the chiller, 1 month rental, because we're running on 1 stage of the cooling system right now. And 1 stage, when it gets above 80, it gets pretty hot and humid in there. If it stays below 80, we can cool it on 1 stage. But we all know every fall we seem to be getting temps that schools are getting out. Temperatures are 85, 90, 95 degrees. So the bid includes a 1 month rental for a new unit that is currently hooked up, and then the replacement of the unit, and then demo of the existing unit. So those prices came in at $99,455 by vendor 1 and $131,947 by vendor 2. So obviously we went ahead with the low bid on that project, and then we, like I said, we proceeded on an emergency basis with guidance from the State's Attorney's Office. So Andy, if there's anything else you want to add?
That's about it. Every step of the way we had to check, and it was an emergency because we had to get the unit on order, because I'm sure they don't have one of those
So
sitting on the shelf.
16-week lead time on the unit.
So we just basically had to make sure we could cool the building while this thing's on order. So really, we're just moving forward on this. So is there a motion on this first, Mr. Hunter? I'll go with Mr. Long as a second. Any thoughts, comments? This is out of ARPA, by the way. So Mr. Snipes, did you have something?
Just one. What's the like warranty do we have on this the new unit coming in?
Oh, I'm certain. I haven't got the warranty information yet, but I'll have that ready. I'll have it ready. How's this for Thursday at the committee meeting on Thursday? But yes, there'll be full warranties with all the new units. I just don't have that information right now.
Oh,
there will be, certainly.
all right, thank you.
Any other questions? Roll call vote.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kirko.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Hildebrand.
Aye.
Mr. Raymond.
Aye.
Ms. Foster.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Mr. Snipes, could you kind of
Focus
jiggle
here.
the bottom of your thing? It might, because it's turned off. I think that's where it's coming from. It's not your fault. I think we've got a bad connection. It's all right, though. We'll just try to minimize it. We'll figure it out. At least we know where it's coming from. Ms. Polk is here?
Yes.
Okay. All righty. Moving on to the needs assessment. I apologize. Patrick Curran with Respark. Thanks, Wes. And then obviously, Eddie, if you have something, please jump in.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everyone. My name is Patrick Curran. I'm the founder and owner of Respark Leadership Consulting, and as most of you know, we've been conducting the community needs assessment over the course of the summer. Let's make sure this is working here. There we go. So first, just to get started, I want to acknowledge and thank a few people, but most especially the residents of the county of Kankakee, who contributed in total more than 420 hours of their time to share their perspectives, their thoughts, complete surveys, and provide the data which we've reflected back to you in the report. So on behalf of the people that you represent, I want to thank each of you for mobilizing your communities, talking to people in the county, getting them to participate. And then I'd also like to especially recognize Chairman Wheeler Mayor Curtis from the city of Kankakee, and Eddie Barreo from Rincon for their partnership in helping us design and execute this project and getting a lot of other community leaders engaged. So as the chairman said, what I'm going to present this morning is simply a summary of what's in the report. The full report itself is over 80 pages of slides and detailed data that you are welcome to review. It was provided to the commissioners ahead of this so that you can ask questions today. And of course, if there are specific questions, we're always happy to follow up. Okay, so as each of you know from previous presentations, our team worked with the leaders to develop and design a 4-stage process that would define the scope of the assessment, collect the data, and then ultimately analyze that data and develop the report that was presented to you. That process started in early May. It went public in early July. The formal data collection period ended at the end of July, and then the analysis phase began in August and was completed right around the beginning of September. So throughout that scope definition process, we identified key areas and developed specific questions to explore in the areas of workforce development, housing, business and economic development, mental and physical health, and law enforcement and recidivism. Within that definition, we also designed the survey, and it met the design requirements that the leadership recommended. It was 10 minutes or less. I think the average survey take time was actually about 8 minutes. There were over 40 questions that addressed the 5 areas of scope. You can see several of those questions on that slide there. I'm not going to read them all to you. The survey was available in both English and Spanish. Also, as we designed the survey, we began to understand, and through the interviews we were having with leaders around the county, there was a desire for a youth-specific aspect, and so we developed a 14 to 17-year-old version of the survey that was also available in English and Spanish. And those, again, were deployed, I think it was July 12th, right around there. So the survey, in total, we had 1,062 usable responses to that survey from across the county. And generally, on a geographic, age, and racial composition, that response sample reflects most of the county demographics. You can see from the charts here, there are some obvious outliers. About 70% of survey respondents are women, which is high above the county average in terms of gender population. In the Black and African American community, we had only 9.2% of survey respondents identify as racially Black or African American, and the county average, according to other surveys, is about 15%. So we feel like that group may be underrepresented. The 14 to 17-year-old survey that I just mentioned didn't actually receive enough responses to be considered valid, so we did not include that data in here. In the full report, we've outlined some of the constraints and suggested some other ways that we could get data from that younger population, especially now that school is back in session and people are a little more focused on things like this. Overall, though, sorry, I also wanted to mention there's, and this is detailed in the report, there is some likely skew in the data. Most of the survey respondents, so you have to think of the sample set as a whole, right? On average, there's a higher level of income, higher education, higher level of home ownership, a couple of economic indicators like that, that are just above the other statistical county averages in terms of who responded to the data. Having said that, we still have representation in the survey set from people of low economic status, from folks who are renters, from people across all races and genders and whatnot. So even though there is that possibility of skew in the data, we still feel that the data itself is useful for the county purposes that were laid out to us. And with that, we were willing to stand behind the 95% confidence level that the overall number achieves. So a good high volume of responses and a usable data set as the county leaders are considering how they use this data for decision making. You just want to be aware that there may be some potential skew, and you might want to, obviously, as you move forward with specific plans, validate some of those with additional stakeholders. Okay. So that's the survey. We also, as you know, conducted focus groups and a lot of individual interviews and a workshop with several leaders from the community. That group of in-person conversations and a little extended deep dive with those folks also represented a large diversity that's reflective of the county. It was important also in this set that we were able to speak with and work with some of the elected officials. And also you can see on the right side of that table, people who had background in the 5 areas of scope for the assessment: workforce development, housing, business and economic development, mental and physical health, and law enforcement and recidivism. Okay, so I'm not gonna read each of these. Again, they're in the report, they're there for you to review. But overall, our analysis of the data and of the survey responses led to key findings in each of the 5 areas. Some of those findings point to concrete needs, such as job training, affordable housing, or second and third shift childcare. Other findings point to perceptions or beliefs that are impacting the community, such as the large number of people that reported negative mental health impacts from COVID-19 over the last 12 months, or opportunities to continue building relationships with law enforcement and other public officials within the communities. So I would encourage you to go through and read each of those, see the data that's behind them. The report details the finding. There's evidence and examples for each of those findings as you work through the data. So based on that full body, the survey and the interviews and the focus groups and the workshop, our team found that 3 areas really rose to the surface as community needs, and those are youth supports, housing, and mental health. Those are kind of broadly reflected as the biggest areas of need. So I'm going to take a few minutes here and actually work through most of the bullets. I know it's probably difficult to read the slides on the screen. I think you have these in front of you. But just so that you kind of get a deeper sense of what we're talking about when we say youth support, housing, mental health. And then we're also going to talk about education and some of the racial dynamics in the community. So first, there's a broad concern among community members about youth development, and this idea that the youth in the county are the future of Kankakee. That was understood by anyone and everyone that we talked to as this is a key area of need for us. And if we don't invest in our young people, then we're not going to have a bright future. And whatever we think we want to do today that's going to serve all Kankakee residents, we have to be especially mindful of young people. So kind of building on the back of that or hinging on that, this idea that the overall support system for youth in the county has really broken down, and it's not effectively preparing young people to become effective adults. And I want to be careful here. There wasn't a lot of finger pointing, and I think what our team noticed was there are systems that used to do that, right? We've had for generations in the US an idea of family structures that seemed stable, and that has shifted significantly in the last 2 generations. We've had a lot of ability to depend on broader community for teaching young people how to behave and interact. There were accepted norms and ideals, and those things have shifted over the last sets of decades and maybe a couple generations. And so where we used to just know and trust confidently that if young people got A, B, and C, they were going to become effective adults, and we could rely on their families, or we could rely on what was happening at home, we could rely on what was happening at school, they would grow up to be great people. Those systems aren't working today. And I want to say this is not isolated in Kankakee. Everybody, I think, knows this. I see a lot of people nodding their heads. It's a social problem that's broader than the county. It is impacting here. What we noticed was a lot of community members seem to defer to the school system to fill in the gap. And so the school system has now been charged with doing a whole bunch of other things that before it didn't have to do. And so you can see the strain on that. I was glad to see Frank here this morning. I wonder what he's going to do with this data, right? So there's a need for looking at how do we help young people become effective adults and think differently about the total set of systems and structures that get them there, whether that's mentorship, whether that's job training, whether that's formal education, whether it's summer programs, whether it's community I don't know, community connectivity, right? Think of the tissue that's in the background. That's what that's really about. So moving to the next one, mental health. There were mental health concerns for people of all ages, right? So it didn't matter young or old. It also didn't matter race or economic status. I think our team was actually quite surprised at the high number of people who readily reported that they had negative mental health impacts from COVID-19. People who are familiar with this sector and work in this space know that mental health is still highly stigmatized. It's not something that a lot of people are ready to talk about. And a very large percentage, I think it's between 30 and 40%, I'm sorry, I don't remember off the top of my head, reported in our survey that they had negative mental health impacts, right? So people are able to acknowledge what's going on and may be ready to reach out and ask for help around that. What I think is also kind of stood out to us, and you see that reflected in the bullet there, this idea that residents believe that mental health needs are increasing. So whether that's because of anxiety in the society, whether it's because of COVID, whether it's because of breakdowns of other systems and structures, we didn't dig into those things, and in some ways it doesn't matter. As the county leadership, your residents feel like we have an increasing amount of mental health needs. What are we going to do about that? Next, housing. Housing was something that we heard a lot about, particularly from leaders that participated in the interview. So they know the housing is an issue in the county. What I think was kind of interesting for us to uncover, kind of digging below the surface a little bit, the relationship between quality housing, housing stability, and housing affordability. So you can see that explored a little bit in the report. And this comes into things like the tax rates and rising rents, and how do people actually pay to stay in their house, and then the landlords can't afford to fix up the houses because they're not getting the rent they need, right? So there's some interesting tension and balance there, and really encourage the county leaders to continue the efforts to look deeper in that. We didn't go deep in that ourselves because we were aware of other housing assessments that have been done in the county. So we reviewed some of those assessments. I think we were able to validate some of that data, and then we would encourage you to go back to those assessments and look at the recommendations that are there and pursue kind of what you can on that front. Moving on, the next thing, we'll talk about how this came up in a minute, but education. So we've said investments in the educational system and infrastructure are viewed as high impact opportunities. This is one of the things where the residents really believe if we're going to invest in something, education is a real big opportunity. And that's, I think, partly an opportunity because there are established structures and systems there. It's something we're all familiar with. And so people can kind of anchor like, oh yeah, I know how this works. And if we put money in this place, it seems like that should work. It's also a space where we heard from people that education can be kind of this seed. If you think of throwing a stone in a pond and the ripple effect, right? Education is one of those things where if we push the button here, we can begin to impact a lot of things. We can impact mental health. We can impact job training. We can impact people's social and emotional development over the course of their life by making key investments in education and what that looks like. Moving down, I think we're getting the slides back, but again, I think you have it in front of you there. So we noticed that racial and ethnic divisions still exist in the community. So again, our team was asked to come and conduct this assessment as an outside party and to kind of be neutral and provide some objective as much as we can observations. There is definitely an opportunity to continue bringing racial and ethnic minority groups together and to tie the fabric of the society a little bit more closely. It was inspiring for us, the number of people that we would hear expressing concern about racial divisions for people not like themselves. Whether it was Caucasian focus group members talking about, I know about young black men who are being pulled over by police officers, or hearing from African American focus group members, I've got Spanish-speaking people in my community who can't get the service they need, or I've seen them be rejected from this or that thing, right? So the divisions exist, and there's also this interest in, I'm not sure if it's an enthusiasm, but certainly a concern on the part of other community members that if that division exists, what can we do to close the gap, or what can we do to bring people together and really be a whole community and not just a collection of a bunch of different sub-communities. Okay, and then the last 2 points in particular that I want to share about these findings. So the next one, I think most people know, and I think the chairman and I have had some extended conversations about this. The idea of community is localized, right? You are all county representatives, and you try to think about the county at its regional level. Most of the people that we talk to, they don't think that way, right? They sit down and they think, oh, I'm a resident of Bourbonnais. I'm a resident of Moni. I'm a resident of Moments. You know, my community is Hopkins Park. They're experiencing a much smaller version of community than what this body is responsible for shaping and guiding. So I think there are interesting opportunities and challenges there, but something you need to be aware of. And as you begin to push projects forward, we need to speak to both that localized community mindset as well as help people kind of zoom out and understand that what's good in their local community might be good for the whole region, or even though their local community might not receive a seemingly direct benefit from a certain initiative, it's benefiting the regional community, right? So most of us are probably familiar with the idea of a rising tide raises all boats, right? Most of the people in their daily lives aren't really thinking regionally when they hear the word community. And then finally, as I pointed to, despite any sort of kind of negative feelings or the kind of gaps that we see in the data in terms about economic opportunity, in terms of mental health, the places where people have needs, those are real. Despite that, there is a lot of positive feeling and positive sentiment among Kankakee residents that the future can be good. We definitely did not get a sense that business as usual is going to be okay, right? Change is needed, and community members believe that with the right investments, with the right vision, with the right leadership, that change can be really positive, and the county can experience some rejuvenation, continued economic growth. In some cases, we would hear people talk about, you know, the Kankakee of the 50s when it was kind of lauded as one of the best places to live in America, and that it could again be on that track. So there's a lot of opportunity there. There's a positive feeling in the community psyche I think you can tap into in order to help drive effective change moving forward. So that's kind of the short summary of the overall findings. We've got a few more things I want to share here before we start taking some questions. So I mentioned that education rose to the top. Sorry, Kelly, can we move? There we go. Okay. So in the focus groups and some of the interviews, we had the opportunity to ask the participants, if you were constrained to only one area of investment, so take everything else off the table that you're concerned about, you're only allowed to put money toward one thing, what would that thing be? You can see that mental health, youth supports, and housing definitely got a lot of interest and votes. What was interesting was that education became the #1 thing, in most cases by as much as 3 times a lot of the other things that people were selecting. Okay, and we didn't, I shouldn't say selecting, what they were voicing. We didn't give them options. We just asked them, what's the one thing that you would invest in? And education became the thing that people said, you know I've talked about housing for the last 50 minutes, but I think we should put the money in education because ... And we would hear responses like that repeatedly from focus group participants and from interview participants. In some cases, people would say, like, oh, I'm a law enforcement professional and I care very much about law enforcement. Where we need to be investing is in education. And we would see them push education to the top. So again, I mentioned earlier some of the reasons why we think that might be happening. I feel like part of the takeaway for you all is the people in the county either trust and or believe that the education systems that are here are working or should be working better and have a huge impact opportunity. So as you consider how do we leverage these funds moving forward, and maybe not just ARPA funds, right, but other funding that's out there. The country as a whole has a lot of funding available for educational opportunities. How do you structure certain RFPs that might go and get some of that money? The community is interested in those things. Okay, we also had the opportunity to look kind of closely at the Hispanic population that's been growing in Kankakee County. And one of the areas of concern that leaders identified was, what is the impact of the language barrier? And what we found is that more than half of people who are, let me say it this way, more than half of people who took the survey in Spanish, right? So we should expect that they speak some English, but they prefer to speak Spanish, or they selected to take the survey in Spanish because they wanted that to be, you know, their primary language. More than half of those people identified language itself as a barrier to accessing different resources and supports around the county. And that's everything from excuse me, social service supports to things like, how do I start a business, or how do I get a construction license, or, you know, just various ways of interacting with local governments and things that are needed in their day-to-day life. So with that, I want to point out the overall count of the Spanish-speaking community in Kankakee is thought to be undercounted. We've heard this from a couple of different places, but the one that I want to highlight, we had a focus group that was conducted in Spanish, and several of the people who are participating are actually either employees or directly connected to offices of local elected officials and representatives. And what they were telling us is that among the Hispanic population in the county, and particularly the conversations that are kind of happening at home, people who are Spanish-speaking immigrants are afraid to raise their hand and say, I'm here, because they think that that is going to negatively impact their immigration status. Whether they're here legally or not was not a question that we asked, but I think it also, many of you know this, if they are viewed as a dependent on the state, right, then that can negatively impact their opportunity for citizenship, assuming that they're here legally and have done all the other steps correctly, right? So the fact that they speak Spanish and need help, they're afraid to raise their hand and ask for help because they don't want to be viewed as, you know, somebody who's going to become a dependent on public funds. We also heard from that group that there's a lack of culturally appropriate communication in Spanish. We had a fun conversation with the mayor of Kankakee about things being translated, right? And people who speak any other language, Spanish or anything else, they know if you just copy and paste something into Google Translate and then you put it on your website, it's not accurate, it's not right. And P.S., for those of us who are English native speakers, there are a lot of different ways that people speak Spanish. Spanish in Mexico is not the same as Spanish in the DR or in Colombia or Bolivia or any number of other Spain even, right? So we have to be really sensitive to how we communicate in Spanish. The efforts to communicate in Spanish are appreciated, and they're also not reaching the community all the way, because partly the translation, but also partly I think the way that the communication is like the way it's being addressed. So the family systems in a lot of Hispanic communities work slightly differently. Or if you have a family-run business and they need to take advantage of, or maybe not take advantage, just follow certain legal norms and things, how that information travels through the business might be different than what we're used to in an English-speaking business. So anyway, culturally appropriate communication is a need there. And then the findings also suggest, and we've detailed this on a couple of slides in the report, that the education gap and the communication gap are somehow linked to an economic gap. And in the respondents to the survey, the Spanish-speaking respondents had lower economic levels than the English-speaking respondents. And so there's a suggestion of a connection that if we can help close the communication and education barrier, we can also raise the economic levels of many of the Hispanic immigrants that are in the community. Okay, we've got a couple more slides here, and then we'll be taking questions. Everybody still with me? Okay, so next, throughout the assessment process, our team observed a variety of negative perceptions from multiple angles that may be holding the community back. And so what we try to depict on this slide in the graphic here is there are things like external interactions. We heard a lot about, the gazebo, right? The Kankakee is the murder capital of the US, and therefore nobody is ever coming here. Or that manufacturers today aren't willing to invest in Kankakee because they don't see, what they consider, a vibrant community. Things like that, really kind of soft but external perceptions. And some people saying like, oh, we just need to change our brand, or we need to project something different. So that occurs at one level, and it's reflected in external relationships with the community. And then we also, kind of take that on the spectrum, if that's the external side, cover every step on the spectrum to the internal side. And we observed a lot of people either talking about themselves or people that they know directly, their friends, clients that they work with in their nonprofits, things like this, where they're saying, people just aren't interested in applying themselves, in getting more education, in being stable at a job, or they don't have their own mental perception of why they're a good person or why being in Kankakee County is a way to have a great positive future. So in order for these change initiatives to stick, I think the leadership group needs to be aware that changing the psyche is really going to be one of the key elements here, right? You can pump a lot of money into infrastructure, but that doesn't necessarily make people believe, hey, I'm worth it, and Kankakee County is worth it, and our communities are worth it. So it really is an opportunity. What I find maybe most challenging about this is it often falls to leadership to change the narrative. I've worked in several different organizations personally as a director where there was a lot of either bad blood or negative perception that had to be overcome. And just for myself, the tactic that I chose in those settings was simply to stop having those conversations. All right, and people would raise it, and I would say, okay, that's great. That was then. Here's what I'm looking at. And I would try to shift the lens. I think it will be incumbent on this group of leaders to begin to proactively change the narrative about what's great in Kankakee and how do you help your residents see and believe those things so that they can then adopt that narrative and, again, kind of change the psyche. So some of those things, we asked your residents, what are the assets? What are the strengths in this community? One of the most common responses to that was a sense of collaboration. And it also kind of stood out to me as ironic that most people didn't view their community as the county as a whole. But what they did recognize and really find valuable was when their local community leaders collaborated with other communities. And they saw that benefit of the regional approach. And they're really looking for more of that. And they want to see that kind of go deeper. It was also interesting in the survey data, 51% of county residents feel like the future is going to be positive. 51%, right? Another 30% are undecided. That's really kind of the interesting group to me. That's the group that I personally want to go after because it suggests that they're kind of open. They're like, yeah, we see what's going on here. There are some good things. And there's some things that maybe I'm a little skeptical about. You've got a chance to convince me. You've got 30% of people that are saying, you've got a chance to convince me. In total, that's 81% of the survey respondents. We'll take that reflective of the county. There's a lot of people here who think the future can be good. And they're looking at that collaborative mindset and their pride of being here as part of driving that. We asked them what assets they felt were really kind of critical for driving tourism. And it was also interesting, this came up a lot in terms of impacting mental health as well. The Kankakee River and the natural spaces around the county, parks, municipal parks and whatnot, those were all things that people said, these are great assets, they're under-leveraged, and they're things that we should be promoting both internally and externally for people to take advantage of. So investing in those and then finding ways to share them with the community is definitely a key opportunity there. And then finally, we asked about either people or programs and organizations. And we heard repeatedly that the teens and youth in the county are just a completely underleveraged asset, right? Like a lot of people are talking about them, but not necessarily with them, or they're trying to do things for the workforce that is focused on, you know, people 20 and older, but they're not including young people in that or explicitly thinking about that. So there's a lot of, what I see kind of the optimistic energy of young people available to help drive some of these changes, even though we didn't get enough responses to actually produce a valid data set here. We did have the opportunity to talk with 6 different teenagers in 2 focus groups, and we had about, I think it was something like 17 or 20 youth responses to the survey. They want to be engaged. They want meaningful engagement, and they want to have an opportunity to help shape the county. Most of the individuals that we talked to didn't even know kind of how local government works or ways that they could be involved to help raise their voice and move that forward. So there's really an opportunity there. Okay. So just the last 2 slides here. Given some of the mistrust and the community divisions that we observed in conversations and statements that people made, we really feel like it's important to take an inclusive approach toward whatever change the county is going to drive forward. And it was interesting to us, the chairman asked me if we could quantify this. I said, unfortunately, no, because we weren't expecting to measure it. People made some very interesting statements in direct interactions where it was clear to us that they were either skeptical of the government and initiatives that happened by the government. I had one woman press me. She asked me 3 different times directly who I worked for, and she refused to accept my answer. I don't know what else to tell you. This is the truth, right? And so we'd see that. We also saw skepticism around big business and large kind of corporations and the efforts to drive economic development in the county. But if they're only, you know, leaning toward big business, then big business isn't interested in me as a community resident. So again, an inclusive approach. Same with law enforcement. I think there's a lot of history here. You all probably know better than our team does, but there's still a sense of mistrust between local communities and law enforcement at some levels. I know there's a lot of work that's been done to help close those gaps, and I understand the Sheriff's Department in particular is doing a lot to try to be transparent and engage with the community, so do more, right? Which, of course, that's an easy thing to say and a hard thing to execute, but there's still opportunity there. And then, of course, you have the communities of different racial and ethnic minorities, and we heard explicit comments about like, oh yeah, that group needs help, but I don't want that help here. Or I don't think that group should get help because they just take advantage of it. Or that group always gets help, what about this other group, right? So there's still a lot of that tension around racial and ethnic communities. So be inclusive in your approaches moving forward. Invite people to the table, go the extra length. My sense of the conversations we've had is people have tried to be inclusive and other people have not engaged, again, because of some of that mistrust. Take 2 or 3 more steps to try to get them engaged. Ultimately, you can't make up their mind for them, but you know, I think it'll be worth your effort, is our belief. You'll have added community benefit by being very inclusive on those things. And finally, we really feel like the assessment finds that, you know, within youth, housing, mental health, and education, there are opportunities to maximize the funding if you target 3 things. Okay, so the first one is target investments that drive structural change in society. Again, business as usual is not really what a lot of people in the community are looking for. How can we drive structural change creatively to build a better future? Second, target collaborations in multifunctional infrastructure. So we heard from lots of people like, oh, we need to build a new facility for mental health, or we need to build a new facility for youth programming. How can you wrap some of those things together and use the infrastructure investments to pull some of these threads together, right? So targeting those. And then finally, targeting transformative projects for mental health and youth development. There's a lot of ideas that people are like, oh, we should just add technology to this thing, right? That's what I call +1 thinking. What you're really looking for is the thing that makes you go, I'm not sure that's going to work, but it sounds interesting. Right now, if you're saying I'm not sure it's going to work and here's 100 reasons why I don't think it's going to work, that's different, right? But when somebody has a really transformative idea, they're thinking about doing something in a different way. The common example for this is Uber, and I'll actually use Uber just to paint both sides of this. So transformative Uber is, okay, people need a ride everywhere. There's a whole bunch of cars out there that have open seats. What if we put people in those seats? That was transformative for the local transportation industry. The +1 Uber was, people need to schedule a ride, we're going to build an app. Right? So it's not hard to build an app. You can build an app to help people find mental health. I know of some great initiatives in the community that are developing apps to help veterans connect with advocates and supports, right? That's awesome. That's good stuff. It's not entirely transformative. So there's really a challenge here to find people who think differently, to reach outside of your traditional sectors, to put together assets that maybe you didn't think those should go together. But if we link them in this way, we can do something that's never been done before, and we're not entirely sure how it's going to work, but we believe that it could work. That's where your transformative, innovative ideas come from, right? So really seeking those, challenging the organizations in the community to work together to create transformation for young people and for the mental health situation. Okay, I appreciate your patience. There are no more slides that I'm going to present. There are a lot more slides for you to review, and at this point, I'm happy to take any questions. And let me just ask before we get questions, Kelly, do we have the rest of the report loaded or no?
I believe it's on.
Okay, great. I may ask you if you can easily just flip to certain slides as people ask questions. Would you be able to help with that?
He'll give you the page number.
Yeah, I'll just give you a slide number.
Okay. All right, start up. Mr. Hunter, did you have something before we were?
Yeah, I did. I didn't want to interrupt you. But I think you kind of affirmed some of the perceptions and ideas that we have about Kankakee County. You touched base in terms of the schools having to raise our children, and that's probably based upon the lack of nuclear families. You know, thank God that I had a mother and father in my family, and they always stress education. Of course, Mr. Pace is here, and I'm sure he would attest to the fact that of the racial division and mistrust. Our state's attorney and our sheriff, and like for example, tomorrow we have a meeting. The NAACP and is meeting with law enforcement in Kankakee County, trying to bridge the gap in terms of mistrust that you talked about in terms of the community and law enforcement. When you think in terms of what the state's attorney is doing with his mentorship programs and so forth, those things go a long way in terms of addressing some of the juvenile needs that we have in our community. Additionally, looking at the asset component in the report, I mean, it's spot on. And in terms of the things I just mentioned about the state's attorney, the sheriff, the NAACP, and so forth, that's good stuff. And the stuff that you have in here is empirically based, and it's not fallacious stuff. And ongoing investment in this community. Dwayne Dean is investing lots of mucho dinero in our community in terms of opening up new facilities, new programming, deferring action, going to Riverside and doing stuff at the living room. There's so many different things that are happening here, and I think you're correct in terms of stressing some of the positive stuff as opposed to the negative stuff. I think one really key word that you used was collaboration, and I'm just really pleased that this is not something that you're going to just sit on a shelf and not read it. I think it's facts based, and we need to the action items that you reference need to be done, and it needs to be an ongoing process. So I just want to thank you and Eddie and your team, because I remember being interviewed. My interview wasn't like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It wasn't 20 minutes. It may have been like a half an hour, 45 minutes.
I think it was 45 minutes.
45, yeah. It was intriguing in terms of how you posed the questions, and I had to really be kind of cerebral in terms of responding to the hard questions that you pose. So anyway, kudos to you and Eddie and your team for this document. I'm sure we'll act upon this.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Hunter. And again, I just want to emphasize maybe two things. First of all, this effort is a group effort. So our team at Respark was 5 people, in addition to support from Rincon and Dwayne Dean, as well as each of you and the community members who really made this possible. So we're pleased that you find it valuable. And I think it's important that you recognize this is maybe the groundwork to begin, right? And so now it's really about bringing in others in the community and determining where do you go next.
Not only that, let me just, you got to look at additional kudos to and responsibility for the chairman as well too, and Mayor Curtis, for working together in a collaborative way. And that's the thing I was talking about, in ongoing discussions with the chairman about the work product and the process. I think this is kind of historic in terms of Chairman Wheeler and Mayor Curtis and other entities that they were involved in this, Dwayne Dean, et cetera. I think, again, collaboration will give you a better work product and a lot better results.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think people, when they see collaboration, they celebrate it, but they also notice when it's not there. I think that's important as well, and sometimes we all need to do better in that aspect. Mr. Snipes had his hand up first, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Again, I appreciate the report. I'm going to assume on page 5 of your report, when you identify the females, that first, that 70.2% is actually a percentage and just not a number, correct?
Yes, each of those should be percentages. And what that reflects is among the people who responded to the survey,
right,
70.2% identified as female.
Out of the 50.
Out of our 1,062
right
respondents.
So, okay, so the 70.2 is a percentage of the 50.4%, the 50.4. Because other than that, it would look like there's a whole lot more women than men. You see what I'm talking about here?
Right. So that's why we've said that's a potential skew. The county statistic is what, 50.4%. The respondents, 70.4% of respondents identified as female, and so we've said that's not equal to the county average.
Okay.
Right? And that we're calling that out there.
And then you spoke on the kind of the race. We talked about the racism versus the racial versus the ethnic. And what I would like to know is, because a lot of times people throw that word racism around. However, I believe the generic term tends to leave us in a kaleidoscope of possibilities as to what one is trying to convey. Does that racism mean discrimination, disparity? Does it mean prejudices, which is all different words? And then the other thing is when we looked at the word racism, did we pair it into generational? Because there might be a greater percentage here at with baby boomers, but by the time you get to millennials, because they are working a little bit more so with one another, that number may have decreased, and there's some hope, a glimmer of hope that comes through. And then whether it is a de facto racism versus a de jure, is that all been considered?
So I think those are great perceptions, Commissioner. This was not a study specifically about racial dynamics in the community, and even defining race for this type of assessment was quite difficult because race and ethnicity are not things that are kind of formally recognized in other typical demographics. So I would say they weren't considered at the detailed level that you are thinking of. And part of what we wanted to point to was this is definitely a factor in the community. And so when we think about opportunities that drive structural change, you'll see some of the things that we've suggested as examples there are whether it's workshops or programming or community efforts that educate people about different communities, and how do we be a diverse community that is targeting equality and inclusion for all people. And that's where I think you could dig into some of those deeper layers. So no, we did not specifically slice and dice it by, people over 50 had these perceptions and people not over 50 didn't. A lot of the, again, this is one of the challenges with an assessment like this. A lot of the data is qualitative, right? So there are some things we can numerically count, but in this case, most of the things that we've identified as leaning toward racial divisions in the community is how we stated it in the report. That comes more out of the qualitative comments that people are making, interviews, kind of offhand suggestive things. And just because of the scope of the assessments, we did not get into some of those micro definitions that you're thinking of.
Okay, so it's more of a macro type of perspective.
Yes.
Which is good because in concluding, when we get into, when we pull up data, a lot of times when we use the word race, ethnicity, et cetera, individuals go, again, as I say, through the kaleidoscope, and when something is macro versus micro, it falls into the perspective that Dr. Margaret Burrow once said, we're not divided, we're just disconnected. And so in that perspective, I'm looking at what can connect us when we look at this type of data.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Lear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Noting the overrepresentation of females in this survey, do you think that had any impact in terms of conclusions in regard to education and the high priority that was given to education?
Again, I appreciate the question, Commissioner. We hadn't thought of it quite from that perspective. We did look, and we ask ourselves, what overall do we think this might have had an impact on? Your question, I just want to be clear, it seems to suggest that you feel men have a different attitude toward education. Is that what you're saying?
I think that has to be considered.
Okay. So I can't speak to that. That's totally a valid opinion. The data that we've shared where education rose to the top comes out of the focus groups, and our focus group participants, I have to go back and actually we do have that. If we can go to the, one second, Kelly. I think it's slide 6. Yeah, so the focus groups were about 3 to 2 female to male, right? 20 males, 28 females. The number here is low, so that emphasis on education is not directly coming out of the 1,000 plus survey respondents. It's coming from that question in the focus groups.
A couple of other questions. When I think in terms of disconnects, Economic Alliance has been working hard for a number of months on what clearly are seen as some housing needs within the community. And yet at the same time, the Alliance reports that the price of housing in this community is something like 79% of the national average. So the challenge that must be faced must be separate from the price of housing. I don't know whether there's any comments you'd want to make in regard to what in a way seems to be a disconnect in my mind. If housing prices are low, then why is the need high?
I think this would be more anecdotal. So we're not a housing research firm. There are lots of other groups that do that much better than we do. We do have one person on our team who actually has a lot of experience in this area, and he and I have both experienced some different community development models together. But anecdotally, I think I would offer 2 things just as a consideration for that. First, the price of a house and an individual's ability to afford a house are 2 different things. And so while the price of housing might be below national averages, and I live in a community where literally the value of my home has increased 45% in 4 years. I could not afford to buy the house I live in today. Thank God it costs that much now, right, if I want to sell it. But I can't buy a new house. So even if I wanted to move, right, I'm stuck there. Just because that price is low or lower than the national average. The people's ability to buy the house, right? You're coming from a different angle and a different end of the spectrum for where they're getting their income, what types of jobs are available. One of the things we found really interesting was the hunger for financial literacy. It sounds like there are many people in the community who don't really understand how to use their paychecks effectively so that they could buy a house, right? Or what opportunities are there to work with landlords to say, hey, can we get a rent freeze for 5 years so that we can help some of these people stabilize what's going on economically for them, right? And then we work together to do that differently. So that's kind of the first perspective. The second, as I mentioned, my partner and I, we've just been involved in different community development models that were very organic, volunteer-driven, shoulder-to-shoulder neighbors building each other's houses. What was amazing to us about this experience, and this is now a global NGO that we worked with 20 years ago, but you saw communities that were very divided, often kind of just being destroyed and torn apart by gang violence and drugs. And all of a sudden, because people are building each other's houses, they have a different type of connection with one another. And so you'd see these communities transform and begin to flourish, starting around housing, right? But it was really about the fact that we're working together to do something that we're both proud of, that we now have a sense of dignity about. And the cost was something that got absorbed elsewhere by other people who were invested in seeing the community come together. So there are a lot of different models available. Again, it's not our specialty, so I would really hate to say anything formal on that, but I appreciate the question and the perspectives.
And to your point, Mr. Lear, I thought the same thing. And you look at, you know, some of the demographics of who took the survey and maybe the perspective on the type of housing they're looking at. I know that the inventory, maybe Mr. Eckhoff could confirm this, but the inventory on workforce housing is almost non-existent. There isn't a place for people that make the median wage here to go buy a house. That's one of the reasons the land bank exists, because there's a whole boarded up inventory out there for people to buy. So that's what we may come to you and say at some point we could address some of this housing stuff if the land bank was able to acquire some of these properties and get them repurposed. So again, that's just an idea how we might connect some of this information to actions that this board can take to further it in the areas that we have influence. So
I've also, I do want to say publicly, I've seen models of community-based credit unions, so like working with the land bank. The rate of repayment for lower income families is higher than the rate of repayment for a kind of average middle income American. So from a banking and financial perspective, your default rate is lower when you partner with and invest in people that are either building a house or achieving home ownership for maybe the first time. And it's really incredible the stories that you hear from some of these credit unions and community banks that have done this, because the people who now own their home, they feel so emotionally invested in their community. There's no way they're going to default on that loan. It's small and local, right? So everybody knows, like, oh, Patrick's been working to get this house. If I'm going to be in trouble for 1 month, I can go in and talk to the banker, and they know, like, okay, I'm going to be 6 days late on the payment, but it's coming and I'm good for it. And again, the default rates are lower, so it's good business. It's good business if we work the models correctly and we bring people together and think about how do we rebuild.
Yes, Mr. Carrico.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for your report. I just want to, before I ask my questions here, I want to talk a little bit about the language barrier that you pointed out, and also something that I totally agree with you, which is you said education can be a seed to success. As an immigrant myself, and also received education in other countries such as China, I understand and agree with you that sometimes it's kind of difficult when you're dealing with a foreign language. But it leads me to a section that you put it out that was prioritize the needs. It was related to education. My first question would be, do you have a percentage of participants that actually have demonstrated or having some barriers or difficulties to English education?
So education specifically, no. We asked the questions generically around language. So if we could go to slide 10, please, Kelly. This data comes from the individuals who took the survey in Spanish, and we asked them, you know, where have you experienced barriers because of language and communication? And that's what they shared with us. We did not specifically ask about receiving education either in Spanish. I think you're suggesting like if I could go to school in Spanish.
No, to learn English.
Oh, to learn English. Okay. We did not ask about that, resources that could be available. So.
Okay, because I understand that, you know, the language barrier, like I said, is a difficult thing, and I know that sometimes we have to put things in Spanish. And, you know, when I learned Spanish for the first time, I learned Spanish from Spain, and I agree with you that Spanish can be very different from Spain, from Mexico, and Colombia, and other places. I do that, understand that. So I was just wondering if that had a percentage of people that also that demonstrated that, hey, it's kind of difficult for me to get the service from this department because I do not understand exactly what, you know, they're trying to say. But if they also had some issues with, you know, or demonstrated some interest, well, let's learn the language. The other thing is, if
okay. Sorry, let me interrupt you for a second because I think I wasn't clear on your question. So yes, broadly, people that speak Spanish have said, I've had trouble getting services from government agencies and departments because of language. Either I don't speak their language, there's no one there that speaks my language. This has been a barrier. The interest expressed in learning English, we did ask in the workforce development area of the survey kind of what types of classes and things people are interested in. There were a number of people who responded they would be interested in learning Spanish, which we found to be very interesting. Also, American Sign Language. It was only a couple of people, but there were multiple people who said American Sign Language would be an interesting course that they want to take. It does not stand out in my memory, and I'd have to go back and look whether or not we had respondents who said, I'm very interested in learning English. However, I do think it's understood by most immigrants that if you're in a country that is kind of monolingual, as the U.S. is, you are going to need to learn at least some of the language. We did ask, you can see it reflected there. This is the fourth chart on the right. I rely on my children to help me with translation. Right, so the expectation there is that the children are learning English because they're immersed in the culture and their brains are more naturally picking it up. And you can see, you know, at least 51% of respondents said yes, that's a dependency.
Okay, so based on your answer right now, my next question will be this. So based on your survey, so do you believe, or do you think that then we need a little bit more educational institutions to be available and help Spanish-speaking individuals?
I think there are opportunities in both directions. So certainly if the community is interested in helping the Hispanic population, which is growing in the county, achieve an economic status where, you know, they're benefiting the community and really be a part of what's going on there, language is going to be a part of that. So being able to provide services in Spanish, as well as you're suggesting, having ESL courses or other things to help Spanish speakers learn English. I think that's going to go both ways. That's my opinion.
Okay, I definitely agree that, you know, like I said, that it's necessary to have people that can speak a different language to help individuals that have a little bit of difficulties, but also the accessibility to the language of which we are actually dealing with on a daily basis would be very important also to have.
I think what you're suggesting is if we had more Spanish-speaking professionals and service providers, is that?
Along with more educational institutions to provide the service for those Spanish-speaking individuals to learn the language.
In Spanish?
Correct.
Yes.
Because to me, the way I look at it, like I said in the very beginning, you know, I'm an immigrant myself, and I study in different countries, including China, and the best way I found to overcome a language barrier when I was studying in a different country was actually trying to learn the language, or at least do my best to learn some part of the language, because I was not expecting to be everything translated. So, but I think, and the way I look at it, I think we need a little bit more accessibility to the education for those individuals and encourage them to go and learn, not just rely on the kids for translation.
So I think the challenge you're putting out to this group of leaders is how can we help people learn, and not only the language, but learn beyond the language, in the language.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts there? Questions? You know, some things may come up. We can always shoot Patrick an email if we have any clarifications, I'm sure, going forward.
Won't this be ongoing, Mr. Chairman? Won't this be ongoing? I just mentioned to Eddie, you know, there's still a lot of stuff, questions that we have in terms of implementation and some of the data and the information's in here. So I assume this is going to be ongoing, right?
Well, the data collection part is kind of over on this phase.
Yeah, I understand
Now, we
that.
may circle back at some point and say we need to maybe work with the schools and all the superintendents, you know, regional office, and really drill down into what kids are thinking and wanting and doing and frame that correctly. But, you know, there are things that we're going to need to do, like with a language barrier. We'll look at what, I'm sure at some point, what things that the people would come to the county for in terms of what we provide as the board, administration. You know, I'm sure Jim's office has bilingual people there because he's engaging on it every day. I'm sure, you know, that other offices have to have that capability. We need to make sure that we have those forms in our planning office for people to, or to appeal their taxes out of the board of review, you know, that kind of stuff. That's a project that we knew we had to get into, and I'm sure we have that capability, but do we have people in those offices that can talk across the counter? The things that we can impact, yes. Those things that those other elected offices do, you know, they staff their own offices the way they see fit. So, but the ones that have to engage, I would say pretty much do now. But that's just a guess.
I'm not sure if you answered my question in terms of, I'd like to see these guys back here again. I'm not sure if we have to amend what we're doing.
We just have to decide if we're going to spend more money. That's basically
yeah.
It. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've got a good start, but we know we're going to take this and develop our granting opportunities, and that includes with Rincon, because as we design these grants that we're going to put out, and we'll decide. I think it's a good idea to see who's going to check off as many boxes on those top 4 that we're looking at, workforce development included as part of education. And maybe we weight those on the application side of it. You know, there's a food insecurity and housing insecurity that's part of, you know, that kid that's 18 and feels like they're not, and has said they're not college material. Well, maybe they should be driving a semi and make $100 grand right out of high school. Mm-hmm. How about it? And maybe we should look at maybe funding that. You see? No, I think they've relaxed that, have they not? I would talk to, anyway, we'll check into that. But that is a career path. And then maybe it is college. But those are things that we're going to have to decide. And so we'll talk about another group of board members, I would say mostly in these communities that are represented in this data that for the biggest impact. And then really talk to the city of Kankakee and see if they want to partner with us on that. I think this data is their data as well. And if, again, that collaboration, I'm not going to box them in, but if there's something we can agree on, maybe we can both partner on that to deliver those results we're looking for. So, because that's really the biggest area of need, to be honest. You know, you look at City of Kankakee, obviously Pembroke Township, those are the ones that would have the biggest need in these areas that we're addressing. Mr. Snipes.
Just one thing, and this is a comment, I would like to see the data and research kind of concise into like a de facto where it's something that exists in reality, but is really not recognized versus the de jure, which is something that is recognized whether, you know, or not the reality exists. So between those two, I think it'll bring us into more of a not a myopic, but more of a concrete type of I won't say data approach, but a concrete view of how we're going to use this data when it goes into our respective areas. Because again, you know, when you deal with it in macro, it's one thing. When it comes to micro, like the different board members and their communities, it would be the data would take on different aspects from the base.
All right. Is any other thoughts? It was a good presentation. It was a long one. I was sorry about, I'm glad the other guys got to leave. They're happy they didn't have to sit through that before they got the proclamations, but we do appreciate it. This isn't the last we'll see you, obviously, as Mr. Hunter said, but we're gonna start moving forward with Eddie on his side of it. Eddie, do you have anything to add to any of this? Steps that we're going to take, and otherwise.
Sure. So I think the next major step that we're doing is really starting to frame the request for proposals. As the chairman mentioned, this is going to be looking at collaboration. So individuals are going to be submitting the proposals based on some of these high-level recommendations. We are going to be looking at collaboration to really hit different areas within the spectrum, including, and I think there's going to be part of where we're talking about behavioral health, the high rise of overdoses of opiates or fentanyls within the community. So a lot to exciting things that are going to be coming up, and then as we move into the development of the request for proposals and the actual presentation of the request for proposals for the community members to be able to submit. So we'll be meeting with chairman and some of the committee members to really draft and present it to the community board for suggestions. So thank you, Chairman, again for the opportunity to serve.
Thank you. And it's just the beginning. This is like everybody mentioned. This is just a start. The partnership that we're trying to build with Rincon is sure, we've got seed money to get going. That's going to go away someday. And then what are we going to do going forward? Well, there's grants that private 501c3s get that counties can't get, and vice versa. And if you have a partner that's in workforce in all these areas, you can supplant what the county was kicking in to get this thing moving with that ongoing funding source until we all know the grants go away someday. Hopefully not the next year, as sometimes happens, but that's why maybe we'll look federal than state, because the state seems like they want to shift directions every year. But anyway, that's kind of the plan is going forward. That's one of the reasons this board made the decision. We just don't want to fund brick and mortar outside of the things we're doing at the county, and we don't want to fund salaries and insurance, because how are you going to pay for that after we're done? It's more the programming long term that gets results, then we can make financial decisions later. Is it worth to keep going after this? We saw the needle move. Do we want to help and partner with other people to make sure that this continues? So without starting somewhere, this is somewhere. So any other thoughts? Appreciate it. All right, moving on.
Thank you all.
Let's see here. Certificates. We have 10 years Kelly Bloom from Animal Control. Kelly come today? No. Sarah Christensen, Schools. And 20 years Carmen Lewis, Public Defender. Thank you for your service. We already spoke to Mr. Deeney. The minutes of the last meeting, August 9th, excuse me. Motion and a second, please. Mr. Hunter, Mr. Smith, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Claims Committee reports. Is there well, you got to read them into the record.
Yeah.
That would be helpful.
Mr. Chairman, members of the County Board, your Committee on County Claims have begged leave to report they've examined the following claims presented and recommend payment. The clerk is hereby authorized and directed to issue orders to several claimants. Total claims of $7,451,652.81.
Mr. Lear with the motion. Is there a second on that? Second, Ms. Hudson. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess. Aye. Mrs. Polk. That looked like an aye. Mr. Snipes. Aye. Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker. No one there.
We lost her.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Hildebrand.
Aye.
Mr. Raymond is gone. Ms. Foster.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye.
Call Pat again. She's unmuted now.
Ms. Polk.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, motion carries. Under department reports, please.
County Collector's Monthly Report for July 2022. Total cash and bank and investments of $24,203,469.66. County Treasurer's monthly report for July 2022. Total in, forgive me, First American Bank ending balance of $11,911,425.38. At First American Bank for the tax collection account, ending balance $13,824.89. At the tax e-pay account for First American Bank, the ending balance is $347,738.66. And Illinois funds at U.S. Bank, the ending balance is $11,930,480.73. Coroner's monthly report for July 2022. Total calls 105, coroner's cases 21, autopsies 11, toxicology 11, 1 indigent, 1 fetal, 37 hospice, 46 referrals, 63 cremations, 5 x-rays, 1 outside autopsy, 2 COVID-19, and 12 pending. Coroner's income summary report for July, total of $3,223.27. Circuit clerk cash book, total disbursed for month ending July 2022 is $291,228.87. Recorder's monthly report for July of 2022, disbursement fees paid to the county treasurer of $162,432.11. County clerk's monthly report for July of 2022, total of $25,183.65. The animal control monthly report for July of 2022, total of $28,344 in the IPTIP building fund, $752.71. Total animals handled 109. The monthly resolution list for September of 2022, total of the county of $1,376.37.
All righty. Is there a motion to combine and approve on that with Mr. Long, Mr. Alexander Hildebrand with a second? We'll do a roll call. I think I can do a voice vote, but let's do roll call.
Okay. Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Mrs. Polk?
Aye.
Mr. Snipes? Mr. Seroy?
Aye.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mrs. Weber?
Aye.
Mrs. Peters?
Aye.
Mr. Carrico?
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff?
Aye.
Mr. Featherling?
Aye.
Mr. Donnell?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra?
Aye.
Mr. Hunter?
Aye.
Ms. Hudson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Alexander Hildebrand?
Aye.
Mr. Raymond? I'm sorry. Ms. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler?
Aye. Motion carries. We still have 20, right? We're not close to 15. Just so I know. We have somebody leave.
You got 19.
Okay, all right. Just making sure if somebody else walks, then we got to make sure we have a quorum, because I know this has been a long meeting. Under committee presentations and resolutions on the consent agenda, anything to be considered separately of those 2 items? Second time? All right, motion to combine and approve 151 and 152. Mr. Miller, Mr. Featherling with a second. We can get those briefly read. Title?
The reappointment of Amy Ciascio Jarvis to the Kankakee River Valley Forest Preserve District, and the reappointment of Ralph Mercier to the St. Anne Fire Protection District.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Consent agenda is a roll call.
I'm sorry?
Roll call
Aye.
on consent agenda.
Oh, roll call. I'm sorry, you're right. Roll call, please. Yeah.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber. Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Parker. Gone, sorry. Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Hildebrand.
Aye.
Ms. Foster.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Under PZA, ZBA case 22-08. Del?
Didn't do the highway one.
No, highway and building has been removed from the agenda. So this crossed out, isn't on everybody's? Okay, sorry. It was crossed out on mine. They have some language issues within the ordinance, so they have to go bring that back again next month. So, yeah, I'm sorry? Okay. All right, so Del, once you get set, is there a motion to approve first to get this going here? Mr. Featherling, a second. Mr. Lear? Yes.
This time I'd like to disclose that I have a financial interest in this property and will be abstaining from the vote.
Okay. All right, Del?
Kelly. ZBA case 22-08 is a request by Turning Point Energy to have a special use permit for a 4.99 megawatt community solar garden on a 38-acre tract just outside of Diversitech campus, which is shown on the map there in red. It's in Manteno Township. The Zoning Board of Appeals voted 6-0 to recommend approval. There were no objectors. They did place 3 conditions on the approval, and they are our standard conditions. Condition 1, the ground cover shall be planted with native pollinator-friendly species. 2, all required landscaping shall be subject to the maintenance requirements and penalties prescribed in the weed and grass control plan. And 3, an 8-foot tall agricultural style fence shall be permitted in lieu of the required chain link fence as specified in the application's site plan.
And that recommendation also came from PZA as well?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. All righty, so any questions about this project? It's pretty standard. It's a little bit larger than most of these community ones we've seen.
Well, actually, the requirements at the state have changed. Back in 2008, it was 2 megawatts on about a 20-acre parcel. Now they can go up to 5 megawatts on a 40-acre parcel.
Gotcha. Any other thoughts, questions? Okay, we'll take a vote then. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to 2209.
All right, this is also a request for a special use permit by Turning Point Energy. This property here is at the corner of X-Line Road and Larry Power Road, directly across the street from a substation. It is also a 40-acre tract, and it's a 5 megawatt system being proposed on that parcel. Zoning Board also voted 6-0 to recommend approval with no objections and the same 3 conditions as specified on the previous one.
Forgot to get a motion on that. Is there a motion? Mr. Featherling, a second? Second on Ms. Hudson. Ms. Polk, is that all right? Give her one? Okay, thank you. Ms. Polk with a second. Everybody gets one, right? No, the quick question I have is, do they go underground or above ground to connect with the substations?
The above ground.
It's above ground?
It's
okay.
above ground.
Any other questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And we got a awarding of a bid. So if we could read that into the record, the title.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding awarding the bid to the lowest responsible bidder, A&R Tree and Demo to demo structures at 218 and 223 South Laurel Lane in Kankakee.
These are the FEMA buyout properties and went through PZA. Mr. Featherling, motion. Second on that? Second, Ms. Hudson. Any other comments on that, Del, basically?
No, we will, after today, we'll get started.
Right.
So
it's basically taking these houses down. You can't build permanent structures on there, but it is a community benefit to that area. They can use the property and all that kind of stuff, you know. So
when we're done, we'll have 3 lots.
Yeah, we'll have 3. There's one. Do we have one more to do?
No, we already
did the one. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So then, are they contiguous?
Yes.
They're all contiguous. Remember, at one point, I think we had 4 contiguous, but somebody bought.
We actually put the application in for 5, and yeah, we lost 2 of them.
Yeah, we lost 2. So, alrighty. Do we have a motion on that? Apologies, yes, we did. So it's a roll call vote.
Mr. Hess. Aye. Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Kirko.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling. Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Hildebrand.
Aye.
Ms. Foster.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Under the ARPA fund projects on the consent agenda, is there any of those that should be pulled and talked about separately? We'll do ARPA and lost revenue, all of those. So it's any of the ARPA fund projects and any of the lost revenue projects. I'll say 157 through 163. We can do all those. at once.
163 has already been voted on.
Or we already voted on 63, so it's 162. Mr. Hunter?
All of those in mass?
Yes, that's what I was doing. If anyone wants to talk about something separately, we can pull that off. So, second time, anyone want to consider one separately? Motion to combine and approve. Mr. Eckhoff, a second. Second, Ms. Hudson. All right, if we can get just the titles of all of those.
Authorizing expenditure from fiscal year 2022, Fund 95 for the following. Radulovich Enterprises, Kankakee County Health Department, Sumner Township, Aroma Township, St. Anne Fire Protection District, and authorizing expenditure for fiscal year 2022, Fund 98, America Rescue Plan Lost Revenue Fund to the Kankakee County Clerk's Office for election poll book Wi-Fi.
Now, I did want to mention that came straight here, I believe. We didn't go to committee with that because he's on 3G on those Wi-Fi hotspots. The 5G ones is where you really need to be for connectivity, and there's a 30% sale ending before we have a chance to go through committee. So it's not, I wouldn't say an emergency, but it would be silly for us to miss out on that opportunity. So that's why I talked to the state's attorney and brought it straight here. Is that okay? I just want to make sure everybody understood that. It would be, procedure would have cost us a few nickels, and to say mildly. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. We appreciate it. Any other thoughts, questions? Roll call vote.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear. Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Kirko.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Hildebrand.
Aye.
Ms. Foster.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. You feel like having fun reading these in?
Yeah.
You got a thing going here. I can just sit back.
Yeah, this is great.
How about a guest reader of the openings by Mr. Rowe today? Would you like to hear that? Can I have a motion on that?
Did I do something to offend you?
No. He just opened his mouth. I said, when you volunteer, you volunteer.
Okay. You ready? Are we ready for the opening?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
One opening on the Pilot Township Fire Protection District, one opening on the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee for a veterinarian, one opening on the BM Lewis Drainage District, one opening on the Clausen Park Drainage District, one opening on the Canavan Drainage District, one opening on the Joe Bennis Drainage District, one opening on the Little Beaver Special Drainage District, one opening on the Moments Pembroke Union Drainage District number 1, one opening on the Moments Yellowhead Drainage District number 1, one opening on the Rockville Drainage District, one opening on the Yellowhead Washington Union Drainage District number 2, two openings on the Iceland Creek Drainage District, two openings on the Gar Creek Drainage District, two openings on the Grinnell Special Drainage District, two openings on the Mantino Drainage District number 3, two openings on the McGillivray Special Drainage District, two openings on the Raymond Drainage District, three openings on the Baker Creek Drainage District, and 6 openings on the Kankakee County Regional Planning Commission.
All right. Any new business or old business? We have some other business. So we need to do the one final thing regarding our bonds. It's our last reading of the ordinance. So would you like me to read this, or would you?
This?
Yeah.
Ordinance authorizing the issuance of general obligation bonds, alternate revenue source in one or more series of the County of Kankakee, Illinois, in an aggregate principal principal amount not to exceed $1.5 million for the purpose of financing various capital improvements within the county, including but not limited to building and equipping an addition and improvements to an animal control facility within the county, including in connection with said work, acquisition of all land or rights in land, mechanical, electrical, and other services necessary, useful, and or advisable thereto, paying certain costs of issuance thereof, and providing for the levy of a direct annual tax sufficient to pay the principal of and interest on said bonds.
So is there a motion to start with?
Yes.
Ms. Hudson, a second.
Polk.
Ms. Polk with a second. Any questions about this final step? We've been through it. I just want to make sure we're wrong. All right, roll call vote. Yes. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Times were dire when I came onto the board. We were coming out of a very prosperous time. The jail had a very lucrative bed rental program, and many Chicago businesses had moved offices into Kankakee to receive huge tax benefits, which in turn hugely benefited Kankakee and county. Both of these income streams were drying up unexpectedly. We had to look for alternative revenue sources. One was the landfill. Fast forward to today, we have had a very short-term influx of cash, not an income increase source. This bond is said to be paid for by animal control. Now I'm asking, what is that money paying for now? Where will the money come from to replace that? Thank you.
As we have said, this is coming from the fines and the fees and animal control. We also had a long-term increase in revenue and a long-term reduction in expenses to get us out of this hole. And that statement, it belays everything that actually happened. It's totally not true what you just said. So good luck on that. But I will say that the hard work that we did aside, in 2 years, we're gonna have, 99.9% of our bond capacity free because everything's paid off. We're gonna have zero bond debt in 2 years. Think about that. No government in Kankakee County, I don't think, that does bonds can say that they're gonna have no bond debt in 2 years. Zero. People talk about Bradley. Bradley just traded one debt for another debt. They didn't get rid of their pension, they just put another debt on there. So I think we're gonna be the only ones, and I'm darn proud of that. So this money is coming directly from fees, and it's not coming from property taxes because that's what funds animal control. Frankly, you should know that after all this time. So, is there any other questions? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Nay.
Mr. Kirko.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Hildebrand.
Aye.
Ms. Foster.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. You now own an animal control facility. So we closed on it. It's our building. It's already done. The other closing on the property next door will be done, I think, in the next month. So there'll be more updates to go on that. The other thing that you should know is we don't have to buy materials for the build out right away. So we're waiting for the market to kind of stop acting crazy, as they say. So the important part was the securing the location, which was the best location possible for the residents of this county. And then the financial model was also a very important part of this because we didn't want any property tax money to go to this. So our property tax payers have been burdened by this types of thing over the years, not just us. You know, we talk about people want to invest in schools. Look at your property tax bill. You already are investing in schools. About 80% of your property tax bill is the schools. Now, I'm not saying they're doing a bad job, but I'm saying that we do devote a lot of resource to that as well. So I think we're on a good plan here for animal control going forward. Now we need to get another couple of agreements, and Carrie knows this, and then we'll be right in where we need to be, taking care of these communities like we do. And I know the residents are very appreciative. So any other thoughts? Yes, Mr. Hunter.
Speaking of that, Mr. Chairman, where are we regarding these dog agreements with the other municipalities, especially City of Kankakee?
Why don't I don't have the word because the sheriff and Carrie are working on those, okay. But I do think that that's a legitimate question for I would say community services.
Yeah, because I know they were working on it. I just wonder what the status was, but I'll wait.
Yeah. All right, any other thoughts, questions? You have a motion, Mr. Hess? Yes, sir.
Animal control comes under criminal justice in the morning. That'd be a question for that, and then I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All righty.
Bones, I was just wondering, because I know that they were pending.
Chair recognizes a senior member of the board. Well, how about the second? The second, Ms. Hudson?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign.